Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day. We pray that you will bless our time together today as we discuss some pretty significant events in terms of Bible prophecy and just the general state of the world. And we just pray, Lord, that in light of the time that you would draw as many people unto yourself as possible as we face some troubling times in the world. Bless us this day in Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going back to my old retro title slide that I haven't used for a few years, mainly because I thought when I was using it, that's when YouTube first started to restrict FBC videos. For example, if you're in a browser, just as a word of comment, I'm getting a little bit of feedback too, guys, on the mic. But in terms of the restricted mode, if you're on a browser and you've set it up so your kids, you want to protect your children, you won't be able to do a search and find our videos on YouTube because they're pretty much all put into restricted mode. I guess I'm not sure why. I see a lot of things on YouTube that are not in restricted mode, but it seems like church sermons and things like that, we got to protect people from that. So there are other platforms that we're working on, Vimeo, Remnant Truth Network, Blog Talk Radio does the audio, and then Rumble. And we'll be exploring other alternatives, but just remember, we're a very small church. We're all volunteers, and we're pretty much maxed out on what we can do. So getting a lot of people to help on multimedia and that type of thing is difficult. But if you'd like to move to Central Ohio and help out, we'd be more than willing to have you do that. Also, I think they're still up. If you want to check out the talks that I and Eric Barger, Mike Gendron, and Isaac Gabazon gave for the Last Days Bible Conference, that was to have taken place the end of April and early May in Calgary, Canada. Calgary's where one of the pastors has been arrested and the church has been closed down. Alberta, the province of Alberta, seems to be pushing that. But in any event, if you can go to ldbc.ca, and they will have links to the videos. My two talks were Deplatforming Humanity, where I talked about the great revealing of the great setup, and then the very viral variants of the apostasy virus. I talked a little bit about the Enneagram and some of the other things going on in the church. And both of those are just barely scratching the surface. I did do an update midweek on the Middle East. I'm going to sort of replow some of that ground today. At the beginning of it, I got some grief from all my Weisenheimer friends that I said it would be a quick update, and they said it was an hour and 3 minutes. That's not quick. And I said, that's quick is relative to what it could have been if I had not cut it short. And so we talk about the convergence of events. Today, I'm pretty much going to focus on the Middle East, just because that's right at the forefront of everything. But I want to tell you that there are an enormous number of things that I have. This cultural Marxism and what they're doing and trying to teach to kids in the schools is just unbelievable. For example, there is a lady has a book out, Maya and Matthew. I don't know. I think it might be one person. I'm not sure. I sort of looked at the person's website and it was a bit odd, but it's called They, She, He, Me, Free to Be. She's also come up with a thing called the Gender Wheel. And it's this, so you can sit here and take a spin and see what your gender is going to be. So I'm going to talk more about that in another update, but that's just an example of what's going on. There's another thing that I have not I don't have anything today on it specifically other than to update you on this. There's some significant things going on in geopolitics. For example, in France, about a month ago, it was around April 21st, a blog called Valeurs, and I can't remember the other name of it, published a letter, an open letter from, I think it was 65 or 70 French officers in the military, in the French military, that were saying, listen, we have a major problem in France. We are going the wrong way. We're not taking care of the Islamism problem. Now, it was immediately picked up by the mainstream media and says, oh, they're calling for an insurrection. They're calling for an overthrow of the French government. And that's just not what the letter said. The letter was people who they were French flag officers that were expressing concern about the direction of France. And remember, France is where Macron is the leader. He's up for election. Now he's shifting to the right because of the election. I remember the Economist cover from a few years back where he was walking on water. And remember, I photoshopped him in Macron into a Napoleon outfit sinking into the waters, while flashing the peace sign. He's becoming a little bit right, but there's a major problem with the way that radical leftists and Islamists who seem to be working together, Trevor Loudon has called this and others have called this the Red-Green Alliance. I think it's an appropriate term, how they are attacking governments. And we now have that in our country as well. This week, 120 retired flag officers from the United States military, including people like General Jerry Boykin and others, issued how many of you, I can't see because of the lights, how many of you saw this letter from a few of you did. They wrote a letter, an open letter saying, we have major problems in our country. We cannot allow this H.R. 1, this Election Reform Act, to be enacted in the United States. It will essentially cause free elections to be over, that there are major problems with critical race theory and other things coming into the school and even the military academies. And really, I would give the best term I would use to describe it as a soft purge of conservatives from the military. You see these rather strange recruitment videos now. There was one for the CIA with this lady who was talking about how she was, it was very bizarre and weird. And I'm like, I thought it was Central Intelligence Agency, not the Central Unintelligence Agency. Whether you're a fan of the CIA or not, they've been involved in a lot of things. But it's just very strange that this purge is going on. So Jerry Boykin and a bunch of other officers have issued this letter saying we really need to correct things in the United States. We are on the wrong track. It is, I was watching some different news reports this week of parents, just the stuff they were reading. I think I saw it on Fox. They were reading from children's textbooks. And as one of the fathers said, Hollywood couldn't make a movie about the stuff, and my 5-year-old would not be allowed to see it. But you're pushing it down my kids' throats in kindergarten. So there are people sort of coming up against that to protect their children. They have to. And a lot of people are pulling their children out of the schools. So that's some of the things that I'm not going to talk about today. How's that for 10 minutes of what I'm not going to talk about? So the rest of this will be as quick as possible. How about that? A couple things that you need to know. There is a lot of things going on in the background in the Middle East, and I'm not going to get into detail on this. You need to, as I said last week, there's some articles that you need to read. Saudi Arabia is reaching out to Iran. There have been, at least the reports I saw this morning, there have been at least 2 meetings in Baghdad between Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and representatives of the Iran government, talking about some kind of arrangement where they would cease the hostilities. And this is really where a lot of this is the heart of a lot of the problems in the Middle East right now, is this rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And Iran is trying to control everything. I think Iran would like to take over the holy cities, the Muslim holy cities of Mecca and Medina. So there's this little dance going on right now between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Part of that is driven by Saudi Arabia's concern about whether they're going to continue to have the support of the United States. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has read the tea leaves, so to speak, of what he sees coming out of the Biden administration. And what he sees is an administration that is increasingly pro-Iranian in the way its orientation. I think a lot of what you saw in the Middle East over the past week is due to the rather stark shift in terms of the Iran relationship with how the United States government, the current regime, is interacting with the Iranian regime. They seem to be hell-bent on getting that JCPOA or something like that back in place. And since they seem to be in the spend mode, they're spending money like drunken sailors anyway. They just want to get, I've heard, $90 billion or more to Iran, because they want to make up for it's sort of reparations to make up for the sanctions that President Trump put in. At the same time that's going on, there are discussions going on between Turkey and Iran because of their conflict that they're in Syria. Now, depending on how you read some of the prophecies in Daniel chapter 7, 8, there may be a conflict. Some think there is, some think it's already occurred in the past. I kind of think there's some kind of conflict coming between Turkey and Iran. So Erdogan is reaching out to a lot of different people. And then, and I'll mention this a little bit more, there is these Abraham Accords. Iran does not like the Abraham Accords. Hamas does not like the Abraham Accords. So this is Al-Akbar from about a week ago talking about, they revealed a lot of the terms of the Abraham Accords. And then the Tehran Times picked it up. Leaked documents showed detail of failed Arab U.S. move to form an anti-Iran alliance. Well, that's pure propaganda. That's how they would look at it. But it's an extensive article. If you want to get it in Al-Akbar, it covers a number of pages. And it shows that there are a lot of things going on many different levels. But Iran, understand that the Abraham Accords, Iran does not like. I'll mention those a little bit later. And some significant things even from this morning's newspapers about the Abraham Accords. And whose fault, here just a preview, guess who they're blaming for all the problems in the Middle East right now? President Trump. Because he put in place the Abraham Accords that weren't very kind to the Palestinians, and his Trump peace plan wasn't kind to the Palestinians, therefore it's all his fault. That was front page Washington Post this morning. Big article, you'll see the article inside, and I'll read some of it from the New York Times, because you need to understand how these people think. And I think the memo went out, okay, folks, now's the time to start blaming Donald Trump for all of these problems, so therefore, Washington Post and New York Times, you know what to do. And they started running these posts today. It's crazy. I'll have some scriptures at the end, I think, that will put some of this into context. But here's a headline from the Tehran Times the other day: Israeli hubris par excellence. First we dump the Trump, then we take Netanyahu out. Because these are the guys that are the problems for everything in the Middle East. And there's a lot of introspection going on. For example, in the upper right-hand corner is an article from Jerusalem Post by Seth Fransman from about a week ago. Israel can't ignore the Gulf condemnation of violence that was going on at the Temple Mount. So let me just sort of recap what I talked about the other night in my quick 1-hour update. This is a headline from a Swiss newspaper in French, Le Temps, and what it said, Le Temps, and what it says is, in the cartoon there, it says, I believe it is a landlord dispute in Jerusalem that has gone wrong. Now, there is a very unusual convergence of events that have happened. We've talked about convergence here for almost a decade at least. And that as we get closer to the end, more of these events are going to converge and happen at the same time. And I think it's these events that will lead to the fulfillment of Bible prophecy are going to converge. And I think we see that happening. So what happened was, and I also thought this was a great graphic that somebody sent about the UN. Somebody said, bring in the UN peacekeepers. And somebody had made up this, if that's not Photoshop, that was somebody who was in the right place at the right time to get a very good picture of UN peacekeepers. And if somebody comes in from UN peacekeepers, you know, one of the things you should do if you hear them coming into your area, your country, is lock up your children, because they seem to have problems with sexual abuse and that type of thing against the populations that they're supposed to be serving. That's well documented. So this is what was going on in the Temple Mount. Now, of course, you will hear the narrative from Iran and the pro-Palestinian. It's just peaceful protest. They were only up there worshiping. Okay, now I don't know everything about Islam. I know quite a bit about it. I don't know that rocks are part of the worship process. Here's someone, this guy is not using a wheelbarrow to bring Qurans to the Dome of the Rock or the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Here's some other pictures of what was found on the Temple Mount last week before everything kind of exploded. This is the inside, look inside from the Al-Aqsa Mosque looking outside on the left. And then you see they've set up barricades and rocks. So listen, all of this stuff was set up. And this is a picture of what was found on the Iranian ship, Iranian arms on the way to Yemen. This is one ship that they were able to interdict and board. So the people that did that, do you think that they might do that? Yes. So we know there's a lot of things about the Trump peace plan, then follow that on by the Abraham Accords that were signed last year. A lot of this relates around to a particular neighborhood in Jerusalem called Sheikh Jarrah, or Sheikh Jarrah as some of us Anglos would say it. And the area is located, so here is the Temple Mount. You see my laser pointer? And then north of the Temple Mount, here is the northern wall of the old city along here. You have the New Gate, then you have the Damascus Gate, and here you have the Herod Gate. The Lion's Gate would be here on the eastern side. Then you remember there's the closed up gate that you see in all of the pictures. And north of the wall, there is a place right in here called the Garden Tomb. You who have been to Jerusalem have been to the Garden Tomb. Now, I don't think this is where Jesus was buried and rose from the dead. There's a lot of argument about that. I think the better evidence is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is actually the place. But north of there is this is the area of Sheikh Jarrah, this neighborhood. And you need to understand a little bit about this neighborhood, and I'm getting bogged down in what I went through in detail on my midweek update. But in this area. There's a mosque. You see the minaret there on the right. And back in the last part of the 1800s, it was pretty much, as you can see, it was not very well populated. It was pretty sparsely populated. There was a mosque there. There's also a tomb of Simon the Just. But back in the late 1800s, Jewish people who lived there or who were coming back to the land of Israel from around the world as the beginning of even before the Zionist movement started, they were starting to come back. This is what the Bible prophesied would happen. I'll bring you back, initially in unbelief. This is what's been happening for over 100 years now. So they bought land in this area outside of the Temple Mount. And then they also bought property. So again, here is the old city. Here is Sheikh Jarrah. If you've been there, if you've been to the American Colony Hotel, that's built in the area where some Arabs and Jews lived. And they lived in these neighborhoods together. And then to the west in this neighborhood here, that's heavily Orthodox Jewish today. I mean, it's filled with Orthodox Jews. So if you drive along this highway here, at night, there's shops along here, you will see, it seems like thousands of Orthodox Jews. And they all wear black, and it's hard to see them at night, so you have to be very careful when you drive through there. But they're just out shopping, and everybody's got babies and children. I remember walking through the old city 4 years ago when we were there, and I was behind an Orthodox Jewish guy, and he had a stroller with 2 young children, and a baby and another young child. He had 2 other children hanging on his arms that couldn't be older than 3, and then a couple others hanging. He had about 6 children, and he's going through the old city trying to get the baby carriage up the steps there, talking on his cell phone. It was kind of, but that was not an unusual sight in Jerusalem. It's jarring. So what happened was that the Jewish owners of the property built homes between 1875 and the 1940s. Some of those homes were occupied by Jews, but they also leased them to Arabs under long-term lease agreements. But then there was a war in 1949, and that war resulted in an armistice line. And again, here is to give you an idea, this is the Temple Mount. So this would be the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. And this line here is the Jordanian line that goes down through the city. And then this blue line is everything to the west of the blue line is Israel. Everything else was given to Jordan in the 1949 armistice agreement. Well, that included what Jordan got. Well, not what Jordan got. What Jordan took in the war in 1948 against Israel's declaration of independence was they took this neighborhood and they took over the homes, and the people that were in the homes, Arabs, stopped paying rent to the Jewish owners. This is called, in any culture, if you're renting a home, you pay rent, or you pay your mortgage, or you buy the thing outright. But they stopped paying. From 1949 through 1967, no rent was paid. Also during that time was at the Temple Mount, at the Western Wall, sometimes called the Wailing Wall. This is what it looked like after the Six-Day War in 1967. The Jews had not been allowed to go there for almost 20 years by the religious, plural-minded Jordanian Hashemite kingdom. They kept them away from there. They used that area as a garbage dump. So you need to understand that all of this is connected. So what happened recently was that there was this property dispute worked its way through the courts, and the Israeli Supreme Court was ready to issue an eviction order within the last 10 days. Now, they eventually decided not to as things kind of exploded, but what happened was that Hamas and Iran and Turkey and all these people say, look, they're kicking Arabs out of their homes in Jerusalem. This is not true. This is a complete, bold-faced lie by the Iranians, by the Turks, by Hamas, by the Palestinian Authority, and whoever else is involved. This is not what happened. They were evicted by a court, by the way, which has a Muslim judge on it. We're starting to have Muslim judges. There's one being nominated for federal or Court of Appeals. He was asked, by the way, by Senator Dick Durbin. I'm sure this was a put-up question. Judge, you're a Muslim. What do you know about Sharia law? And you know what the guy said? This is a nominee for, this happened this week. I don't know anything about Sharia. Folks, I don't think it's almost like there's so much that they're throwing at everyone that they're overwhelming the system. It's sort of like what Hamas did with the rockets. If we shoot enough rockets, Iron Dome won't be able to knock them all down. It's the same thing that's happening in our culture and politics with all of this stuff that they're throwing at us. This woke, critical race theory, gender, all of this stuff. And now, they're a judge that says, well, I don't, Sharia, what is that? Does that have anything to do with Islam? And so it's hard to keep up, I guess is the point that I'm trying to make. So that, in connection with that, then there's also what they call the TikTok intifada. And I don't do TikTok because it's pretty tied to Chinese, but these short little videos that people put up that talk about, and so what happened was this TikTok intifada. Here's an example. This is a road near the old city of Jerusalem, and a guy comes in, and as he comes in, he's Jewish. It's clear he's Jewish. And they start throwing rocks at the car, so he backs up, and you can see they continue to throw rocks and that type of thing. And then he comes in, and he hits a guy, he runs up on the barricade. Oh, he's trying to run down Palestinians. And they pull, and then the police finally come, and you'll see a cop come in here in a second but you see him throwing rocks at this guy. And here's a picture. I think the policeman's about ready to show up. Then they kind of get out. Oh, there he is. And here's a picture of the guy with it just a rock. What's the big deal? It's a big rock. That's the big deal. And that's the picture of the guy holding one of the rocks that was thrown at him in the car. So people were attacking Jews all over Israel and putting this stuff up on TikTok. Look how we're fighting the Jews. And it was stoking up things. This was all done with the support of Hamas, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, the Iranians, the Turks, all of that, because they wanted to stoke things up. Then the other thing that happened was this celebration. So they had a convergence of a couple events. On Monday, you had Jerusalem Day was being celebrated and they come to the Western Wall Plaza, they sing, they wave flags. I even have seen some writers in some of the Jewish Israeli newspapers saying, yeah, this is kind of in your face type stuff that we do. Okay, right. Please, people, get a grip. These people are celebrating a great event that happened back in 1967, the reunification of the city of Jerusalem. So they're celebrating there below the Temple Mount in the Kotel, the Western Wall Plaza. And I've been there. I mean, when we were there in 2017, they had a stage set up, and there were probably 5 times as many people in that picture when we were there in May of 2017 as were there this week, because of there's still, the COVID restrictions and that sort of thing. But what happened, and this is what you're going to see, as they were celebrating, a fire started up on the Temple Mount. And this has spread like wildfire through the Muslim world. And this has inflamed them greatly about all these things that are going on. And I can assure you that this video will be shown from now till the Lord returns because of the optics. And I saw Christians running around saying, oh, Al-Aqsa Mosque is burning down. No. Listen, we need to be very careful about things that we claim. So I kind of dug into it. Let me get mine. So you see this other video here. This is taken from the Jewish Quarter, looking out in the lower right-hand corner. And I think a lot of people down on the plaza didn't even know the fire was going on. But they weren't, and I'm sure some of them started celebrating, okay, finally, yeah, they're getting what they deserve. I saw a video just before I came in here from Ari Abramowitz from Land of Israel, who said, there's a lot of spiritual significance to this. Because this is where the Temple Mount is where the fire was sent up to God from the sacrifices. You should go watch it. I don't have time to go into it. And I don't want to misrepresent what Ari said, but it's a very interesting video because, look, from a religious Jewish perspective, this is a very big deal, this place. Very big. And the Temple Mount is a very big deal. But what happened, unfortunately, is that this propaganda is now going to be out, and you're going to, like I said, you're going to see this video till the Lord returns. And I even saw some, I would call them religious, but not highly observant Jewish people saying the optics of this were terrible. And this is part of what led to the missile attacks from things. So while they're celebrating, though, what you see up top there on the Temple Mount, you see the flashes up there on the right, upper right by Al-Aqsa? Those are fireworks that are being shot by people on the roof of the Al-Aqsa Mosque towards Israeli police. They were having a riot, and the Israeli police were in there, and they were shooting stun guns and tear gas grenades and that type of thing to break up the riot. At the end, you'll see an interview from someone with CNN who acts like, well, there was just peaceful worshipers up there with piles of rocks all over them. She failed to mention that. Here's another closer view from there. You see the things coming off of the Al-Aqsa Mosque there on the right? Well, what happened was those caught not the Al-Aqsa Mosque on fire, they caught a tree on fire. And if you've been up there, you know that there are trees there between the arches that are along the top of the western wall and where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is. And it's probably 70 yards maybe. So here's a picture. You see there's the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the left, and there's the tree burning. Now, that's the front of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You go all the way, so that's probably 25 or 30 yards. And here is a video of what happened. And you can see it's one of those high, tall, cypress-type trees. So the guy will pan around to the right towards the Dome of the Rock, and then he'll come back to that. So when he pans to the right, he's looking at those arches that you kind of see right in here in the lower part of the video there. He goes by kind of quickly. Those are the top of the western wall, just so you know. So this, I think I did a pretty good job of documenting what had happened. In fact, I even pulled out some aerials of the Temple Mount. You see the western wall, you see the trees, you see Al-Aqsa Mosque there, the dome on the right, and then you see the Dome of the Rock, and you see those. So it's one of those trees, I think it's the last tree there, that caught on fire as they were firing things off the roof of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You fire fireworks at a tree and it might catch on fire. It could have been a stun grenade. I don't know. Here's a little bit different. Move over to the left. There you see there's those trees again. So that's what happened. So it wasn't but the optics are, oh man, those Jews were burning down Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that's just terrible. So the result of that was that and just inflamed everything. So we had the end of Ramadan, we had Jerusalem Day on the same day. I don't know if that's happened. It's probably happened before, but it's not happened in this particular type of world that we live in right now, where everything is tense and heightened, and you had all the lockdowns. I think we can agree that it's been kind of a crazy world for the last year. In fact, I think I said this, I'm not trying to be a prophet, but I think I said sometime here in 2021 that at some point in 2021, people are going to long for the nice days of 2020. I think we're at that point. So that resulted in just thousands of rockets being launched out of Gaza towards across Jerusalem. There were about 7 rockets that hit Jerusalem. And this is a different order of magnitude than anything before. Here's a 1-minute summary from the IDF that sort of recapped what had happened in just 36 hours. There were sirens in Jerusalem. The rockets were going out. That was in the first 24 hours. There were about 500, 600 rockets. Now it's up to 3,000 rockets have been shot. They've hit homes. People have died. It's more than that. I think there's 8 civilians in Israel have been killed, including some Arabs, an Arab man and his daughter. So Israel started attacking things. They've launched hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of strikes. But this has so while people are, a friend of mine just posted a picture on our Facebook page about people are out shopping in Jerusalem and everything, but when they hear the sirens, and she has family that lives down in Ashdod or Ashkelon, and she's been there that's usually where the rockets hit because they're short-range rockets. That's right over the border with Gaza. Everybody heads for the bomb shelters and stairwells, and they've sort of taken it like, oh, this is a good time to get to meet your neighbors. Or, we'll fix popcorn to take with us to the bomb shelter in case we have to go to the bomb shelter. So they've been very sort of resolute about it. The images are stunning as you see these rockets being shot. You can see the explosions. This is Iron Dome taking out different rockets. And Iron Dome is an incredible piece of thing. Here's another video. This is from Tel Aviv. And you see the rockets coming in, and you'll see the explosions. Those are Iron Dome rockets taking out the rocket. Now, some rockets got through. What Iron Dome does is it picks up the rocket, it calculates it, it compares it to a map of occupied areas in Jerusalem, and schools and that sort of thing, shopping areas. And if it looks like the rocket's not going to land there, they don't shoot it down. But this was unusual that what Hamas did in Gaza was they shot, in about a 5-minute time period, they were shooting about 135, 137 rockets off, which is a little bit different. And it's probably a test by the Iranians to find out how good Iron Dome is. Are they going to be able to resist all these things? It hit different places. It hit a fuel storage facility. Another place it hit here's a picture. It hit a car. Here's a southern Israeli city. It hit apartment building. Here's one where they got a picture while it was still on fire. And a couple people, there's a very sad story of a little Jewish boy, 5 years old. When the rocket exploded, there was shrapnel, and a piece of shrapnel went into his chest and killed him. It also, there was an attack, a rocket that hit the Trans-Israel pipeline. Remember we talked about that about a month ago, where it goes from Eilat up to Ashkelon, and that burned for a good while before they were able to put it out. Now, whether they tried to do it or not, it's only about, I think, 10 kilometers from the Gaza border where that pipeline is. So even if they're not a very good shot, when you fire 3,000 rockets, you might be able to get one to fall. And the rockets, by the way, they don't all make it out of Gaza. At least 10% or more of the rockets fall in Gaza, on people in Gaza. So Hamas shoots rockets that land on their own people, because this is what they do. Well, this was condemned all over the Arab world. This is Al-Quds newspaper on the left, the Palestinian newspaper in Jerusalem, Al-Gad from Jordan. This is just, this is a terrible thing. We can't stand for it. Even the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia came out and issued statements that this was not good. The New York Post, or the New York Washington Post, or the Washington Compost and the New York Slimes, I think as Mark Levin calls them, they tried to be fair, but Israel's like, oh, it's just terrible what you do. I can't believe you're escalating those attacks. I can't believe you're doing that. So people died. I think the death toll in Gaza is up over 80. So this is, in the context of the current world environment, this is a very big deal. And so it came at this time of convergence. Iran was stoking tensions. Hamas was stoking tensions. Now Hamas was part of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's Sunni, but they get their funding from Iran. And there have been TV interviews and newspaper articles in the Iranian press talking about, this is what our funding is doing, our funding of the people from Hamas. What Israel did was they took out some major buildings in Gaza. And you'll see an interview with Colonel Kemp, from a former naval officer in the UK, who's talking about this. But they just, and what they did though was, Israel is very, very clever in the way they did this. They called the building and they said, we're going to knock the building down. You have 30 minutes or an hour to evacuate because Hamas is operating out of your building and we have to shut them down. So get out of there, save your life, run for your life. Now the other thing that happened, is when they announced that, what is this the day and age of? The phone video taking. So what they did was, all these people evacuated, got away from the building, and then started videoing the collapse. And it's posted all over. So if you have Twitter or social media, particularly Twitter's been pretty good. It's just covered with all these videos. And they were taking a video of it because people want to, if it bleeds, it leads, the old saying. I was in LA once, I think I may have shared this before, getting gas in a not so very good neighborhood. This is where the Rodney King riots took place. I needed gas, I was close to the airport, so I stopped here. As I'm standing there pumping gas, all of a sudden, about 30 emergency vehicles, fire trucks, police, and everything come screaming up to the intersection there, including hook and ladder trucks, and nothing's over 2 stories, as far as my eye can see. And I'm thinking, I don't think this is going to go very well. But I was comforted by one thing. I didn't see anybody who was at the gas station or in the stores around there doing this. So I figured it was just some kind of a practice drill for the LA Police Department and Fire Department. Thank goodness. But so if you don't see people videoing something, then you have a good idea that it's not worth paying attention to. But everybody was videoing this stuff. And part of it was by design. It hit a bus, and I can't remember if this is Tel Aviv or Holon. I mean, I see pictures of people in Tel Aviv just, on the ground in the middle of the street, even in Jerusalem, and it has a psychological impact. You're always wondering, what do I do? Can I go 4 blocks to the store? If I go 4 blocks away from home, will I know where to go when the sirens go off? And it has a real psychological impact on the whole population, even though the risk of getting hit by the rocket is pretty small. It's still a psychological effect. The other thing that's happened is that this is from Lod, in other cities which are mixed Israeli Jews and Arab populations, they are having riots all over the country and attacks. There have been some attacks on Arabs by Jewish people, and vice versa, even more so. This is very upsetting to a lot of people within Israel because it has long been assumed that within Israel, the Arab and Jewish populations, since the foundation of the state 73 years ago, can get along. Now, all of a sudden, they're not getting along. They're rioting. They're attacking people. And so in these mixed Arab-Israeli cities, there is a lot of tension and riots. So, and this is what people see. Here are a picture of some of the rockets that they have. Here is a video of. The other thing that they've done is they have started launching some drones that come from manufactured by China or Iran, and they're doing these drones to try to get underneath the Iron Dome batteries. So now these things can do a lot of damage. They're suicide drones, but so thus far they've not really been that successful. Israel has been able to shoot them down and take them out. But part of the thing was we're gonna throw as many things out there all at once, rockets and drones and that type of thing, to get to test the system and see where the weaknesses are. Well, here's just a couple minutes of an interview with, there was an earlier interview on I-24 News with Danny Ayala. If you want a good channel to watch is Israel Channel 7. They do a pretty good job on the news. They also, they have sort of like a round table each week with a few people. And Danny Allen's a former ambassador to the U.S., and he was on I-24 News the other morning, and he said, listen, I'm tired of all you people out there saying that what Israel's response is disproportionate. He was a tank commander, like former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And he said, listen, there's no such thing as proportionate when you're at war. If proportionate was the gold standard, we'd still have areas of Europe occupied by Nazi Germany. The purpose of war is to, unfortunately, kill people and break things. And this is a war. What do you do? How do you live with all these things coming in? So here's Michael Oren, former ambassador to the U.S., interviewed on I-24 News.
Do you get the sense Israel's government was caught off guard by Hamas's ability to strike so deep and so effective into Israel so far?
No, not caught off guard in that way. I mean, the Hamas capabilities are no mystery to us. We know they can hit Jerusalem, they can hit our airport, they know that they can hit our cities with massive barrages, and we know that they will try to overwhelm the Iron Dome system.
Okay, so that's not surprising that they launched
What was
huge
surprising was the timing. And clearly the government was unprepared for having the rockets strike in the Jerusalem area on the first day of fighting rather than the subsequent stages of the fighting. And that caught the government off guard. And the fact that the Iron Dome wasn't effectively deployed to prevent that initial barrage which in terms of its psychological benefit for Hamas was immense, and it garnered support not only among the Palestinians, but pretty much among the entire Muslim world, including among some of our newest friends in that world.
Yeah. Dr. Nerier.
So, and then this is back to that article that I showed you from the Swiss newspaper at first, is that it's essentially, it's European, Western European, and they're pro-Palestinian. The one soldier, a Jewish soldier, was killed. A lot of Hamas people were killed. A U.S. envoy flew to the region. Now you would think, well, it's Israel, who's long been one of our biggest, if not our biggest ally in the Middle East. Why doesn't the U.S. ambassador to Israel just go over and talk to the Israeli government? Well, there's a reason for that. Biden hasn't appointed an ambassador to Israel yet, or one's not been approved. So we don't have one. So we sent an envoy from the U.S. over there, and they're doing this. Now listen, so you have this convergence of events. Just to recap, you have the Sheikh Jarrah ruling on evicting Palestinian Arabs from their homes in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood north of the Temple Mount, around the American Colony Hotel, and the Garden Tomb in that area. You have Jerusalem Day on Monday. You have the end of Ramadan. You also have, I think Monday was the Jerusalem Day is celebrated by the Iranians. So they're trying to stoke things up to make their propaganda points. Then yesterday was Nabka Day. May 14th on the Jewish calendar on the Western calendar is when Jerusalem declared independence. And May 15th, the day after that, is what the Palestinians and the Muslim world call Nabka Day, the catastrophe, because the Jews have their own state. But there has been it's very clear to anybody who's paying attention that the Biden administration has shifted the U.S. policy relationship that the U.S. has with its government away from open support of Israel that we had under the Trump administration. It's very clear. So there was, during the time that these tensions were ramping up, there was a National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, talked to Israel National Security Advisor Meir Ben Shabbat regarding the situation in Jerusalem. What you see before you is a screenshot of the web page from the National Security Advisor or the White House web page with the readout. Okay, so what's the readout? Well, usually you would say a readout is what happened in the conversation. But since we have the Ministry of Truth now at the White House, run by Jen Zuckerberg and that sort of thing, and I think she's already worn out. I heard she's leaving in the near future. It's hard to, what was that guy's name that used to be the press secretary in the second Obama administration? Josh. What was his? I used to call him just Joshing or something like that because it was just sort of adding a syllable to his name, and because he was always lying, in the same way she is. You know, she's like, we don't have any inflation in the United States except for food and gas and consumer items. You know, the stuff people buy. That's the only thing where you have inflation at. It's shocking. But anyway, so the readout in the Biden administration is their version of what happened. So here it says national security, this is their version. Jake Sullivan spoke by phone today with Israeli National Security Advisor to express United States concerns about the situation in Jerusalem, including violent confrontations at the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount during the last days of Ramadan. By the way, this map that I showed you from the armistice in 1949, okay, that, if you look at that closely, it will call the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif. That's not what they call it today. As I've mentioned in the past, they now call Haram al-Sharif, they take the name of the mosque and they make it, the whole Temple Mount is Al-Quds. This is a propaganda tool that is being used by the people in charge. And as I've also noted, Mordecai Kadar and Muslim scholars say, there's no proof, this thing that this is where Muhammad went to ascend to heaven at the mosque there on the Temple Mount, this is nonsense. It was a mosque in Saudi Arabia. And by the way, I think I've mentioned this. Do you know that you probably have heard that all mosques point towards Mecca, right? Because that you want to pray towards Mecca, towards the holiest place. There's a problem, though. All of the early mosques, including those in Syria and elsewhere, including the mosque on the temple. In fact, they don't call the whole Temple Mount Al-Quds. They call it Al-Aqsa, I'm sorry. The Al-Aqsa mosques do not point towards Mecca. Nobody ever talks about this. Jay Smith has done some videos on it. They point towards Petra. So that kind of calls into question the foundations of a certain religion. We won't go into that, but he also said this. Mr. Sullivan also reiterated the United States' serious concerns about the potential evictions of Palestinian families from their homes in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Now listen, this is highly irresponsible on the part of the Biden administration. There is a legal case. This case, by the way, has been going on for over 40 years. Listen, as a litigator, I'm telling you, if you have a client that's paying you and you have a case that's going on for 40 years, that's a legal career. I mean, that's like that. That's a great case to have. I mean, I had a case that went on effectively for 20 years. I had another one that went on for 11. And as long as you're getting paid, it's okay. But I just remember the one case I had 11 when I finally got to trial. The head of the company, he'd been in high school when the case started. So it was, but anyway, I digress. So Israel has a different view on it. And essentially what the National Security Advisor for the State of Israel said was, butt out. Okay? Stay out of the situation. So somebody said this is a picture of a good picture of the Biden at his desk working on this. Again, there were these things. You see these rocks in this holy mosque? And I think I even saw people walking around with their shoes on in there. I was in that mosque one time, and you had to take your shoes off to go in. So here's some of the things. You see the sword here on the left. It says the Battle of the Sword of Jerusalem. And they shot a rocket towards the airport down at Eilat. They show here the people lining up with the missile batteries. I think this is how they were able to launch 130 some rockets in a very short period of time. Iron Dome has done wonderfully, but some have gotten through. This is going to happen. The concern is, they've done 3,000 rockets in 4 days. But what happens when Hezbollah starts shooting off their rocket volleys and they can do 5,000 in a day? So this is a big deal. But if you remember, Israel's done fantastic. Here's a great picture of, you see the rockets coming out of Gaza and the Iron Dome rockets going up. That may be a composite picture, but nevertheless, it's a good picture of what's happening. Here's another one that shows that. Here is an Arab editorial cartoon. And you see how they think about it. So there's devastation all through Gaza. This is where a building used to stand. They're knocking down these tall buildings. Now, the one good thing, I guess, from all this is that the Democrats are arguing with each other, finally, because some support Israel and some don't. You might guess that the squad, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, they are like, oh, this is just, Israel's a bunch of terrorists. I can't believe what they're doing. It's just awful. But who are they dealing with? So here's a picture. They're dealing with terrorists. So here's a picture from, that's a URL to an article by, I think, Seth Fransman or somebody talking about what's going on. But what it is it's a picture of a school that the Hamas headquarters is underneath this school, which I believe is a kindergarten. So, so here's a building that they knocked down. This is, I believe, the AP headquarters in Jerusalem. And they hit a 13-story building with Al Jazeera, and some of the press organizations had their headquarters in that building, and they were told, get out of there, we're knocking it down. Nobody got hurt, is my understanding, except maybe the Hamas people that stayed by. And you'll see another thing come in here. This is a 13-story building. And here it comes. There it is. And then you'll see what happens to the building. So what does that tell you? It appears that they have engineering plans for all these buildings to know where to hit to drop them. Now there was a bit of controversy. On, I don't remember what day it was. What day is this? May 13th, 5:22 p.m. So that would have been Thursday evening in Israel. The IDF released this tweet. IDF air and ground troops are currently attacking the Gaza Strip. So all the newspapers ran with this. Man, look at what they're doing. The Washington Post picked it up. Here's Israel troops have entered the Gaza Strip as conflict with Palestine escalates. That was 6:44 p.m. on May 13th. So within an hour, Washington Post, or about an hour, Washington Post is running with it. Look at what they're doing. They had massed troops on the border. They had tanks. They had armaments. They called up 7,000 or 9,000 reservists, took them to the Gaza border, and were moving towards the Gaza border, but they never went in. And so now there's this controversy. This is the Washington Post yesterday. Israel strikes Hamas tunnels in Gaza, and then the article up there on the right, questions remain after IDF changes story on ground forces in Gaza. Because what happened was the IDF had another plan. This was sort of what you would call a brilliant move. They said, we're going in because they had a purpose. You know, here's a question. This is from Yaakov Katz. I think he's the editor of Jerusalem Post today. Did the IDF deceive the media in an attack on the Hamas Metro? What's the Hamas Metro? Well, the Hamas Metro, and you can see the pictures here on the right of they had massed the troops on the border, but then they started bombing the metro. That's an underground tunnel system, because what happened was all the Hamas people, now there's some question as to whether they started shooting too quickly, Israel, but they attacked all of these underground tunnels where all these arms are stored, and it's literally miles of tunnels that have been built. They didn't use the concrete to build hospitals. They used or a subway system. They did it to build terror tunnels so they could attack Israel. Because what happens is they'll put the missiles down there. It'll open up. Well, when they kind of came out, Israel was then able to identify all the tunnels and entrances, and they went through and attacked them and destroyed a lot of them. There were other buildings were attacked. Here's a kindergarten and a tunnel entrance. This is a Hamas installation on the right next to a beach hotel. here's a little animation of how Israel, this is how they put together this animation about the terror tunnels. This is where this is based on actual things that are there. And so what they did was they sent their precision-guided missiles in, bunker buster bombs, and they took out a lot of these tunnels, destroyed them, and trapped. Nobody knows how many people were taken out in the operation. These are terrorists. These are people that shoot rockets into civilian areas. Here's a picture this is a street in Gaza on the left, and this shows these are where these bunker buster bombs, they drill into the earth. Picture on the right is some of the attacks that are taking place. And it goes all the way down the street there, so it's like taking out the New York City subway with these bombs. Ingenious. So Colonel Kemp was interviewed on Sky News, I think this morning or yesterday, and this was his view of what Israel did in this sort of clearly deceptive thing that they did.
Tell us about that, because that was quite a strategic move where they tricked Hamas into reacting a certain way, and they used the media to achieve that. Take us through that.
It was an incredible operation. In my long and not so august military career, I don't think I've ever known of such an extraordinary surprise attack triggered by deception, a very, very deliberate deception operation. And effectively what the Israelis did is that they massed tanks, artillery and infantry on the border with Gaza and gave every indication they were going in. The tank engines were noisy, there was dust being picked up. The world media picked that up, and Hamas, of course, picked it up as well. And it was then thought there was going to be an immediate invasion of Gaza. And of course, hundreds of Hamas terrorists then went into this, what's called a metro tunnel network, an underground tunnel network they've dug since 2014, which contains weapons, contains command and control facilities and shelter for the terrorists. They went down into there, and immediately they were inside. The IDF then attacked those tunnels with 160 aircraft, which dropped JDAM bunker buster bombs and destroyed large parts of the tunnels. And then when some of the terrorists came out, they then got hit as well from the air. So it was I think, as you said, a strategic victory really for Israel, which will probably prove to be a turning point in this conflict and really hit Hamas with an absolute body blow.
And so this is part of the psychology of war, the indiscriminate missile launches into Israeli cities causes psychological things, and Israel just returned the favor, so to speak. Somebody accused me of not being balanced. I called my thing Israel Under Siege the other day, and somebody said, "You're not being very balanced in your view of this, John." So, that's fine, okay? So here I'm balanced. I think Hamas did a great psychological thing in the war, and Israel did a great psychological thing in the war. How's that? Is that good balance for you? Listen, these are terrorists. If a missile hit near the White House, what do you think we would do? I don't know. Well, with the prior administration, what do you think they would have done? Because they have an obligation to protect things. So this is a back and forth war. I don't think this is going to resolve quickly. Immediately, Hamas has come out asking for a ceasefire through different channels. I think Russia and Turkey have asked the UN to send in a peacekeeping force. If they do, lock up your kids. That's all I'm going to say, given the past experience. But this is for example, and so what's the U.S. doing? We're sending aid to the Palestinians. I think the latest round the other day was $10 million. There's $130 million. the people are not responding well. Here is the Tehran Times, I think yesterday or 2 days ago. War on Gaza reveals Saudi Emirati bromance with Israel. So because they're using all this stuff for propaganda, and an Ayatollah Khomeini came out, we're beating them, we're winning, we're doing everything great. And here, I thought this was a very good article in the Times of Israel this morning by Haviv Rediger. And I'll just read a little bit about this. It says, it's been 7 days now into the latest rocket war with Hamas, and the organization has spent the better part of 6 of them quietly, evasively begging for a ceasefire. That's not because the organization is cowed. The opposite. It has already achieved its main strategic goal in the fighting to sideline Fatah and become the preeminent power within the Palestinian national movement. This is true. Abbas saw Hamas rising, and he canceled the elections. Now they've attacked Israel because of what happened on the Temple Mount. So Hamas is way up there now with the Palestinian people. And that's why Abbas canceled the elections. And I don't think Israel wants Hamas to be running the Palestinian Authority. So they didn't really care that the elections got canceled. So anyway, Hamas appears to believe Israel would seek a quick de-escalation. It was wrong. Israeli political and military leaders could not afford to grant Hamas the quiet it had gambled on. There are many reasons for that, from Israeli public opinion shocked by the rocket barrages of Monday evening to the belief among Israeli planners rooted in the past decade of relative quiet that Hamas can be deterred for years at a time if each round of fighting causes enough damage to the organization. When was the last time Operation, was it Protective Edge or Cast Lead? 2014, 7 years ago. So Hamas has been, I mean, there's the usual little rocket barrages here and now, but nothing like this. And it would be very difficult to go in on a ground invasion. This is very densely, one of the most densely populated places on the planet. Narrow passageways, tunnels, apartments. It would be very, from a personnel, from losing soldiers, it would be very, very bad. Hamas appears to believe Israel would quickly seek a quick de-escalation. It was wrong. Israeli political and military leaders could not afford to grant Hamas the quiet it had gambled on. There are many reasons for that, from Israeli public opinion shocked by the rocket barrages of Monday evening to the belief among Israeli planners rooted in the past decade of relative quiet that Hamas can be, I already read that, I'm sorry. But there's another reason, a more fundamental one that has only been tangentially mentioned in the coverage of the fighting, an Israeli calculation that reaches far beyond Gaza's border. Here's the money part. The Middle East is watching closely as the events unfold in Gaza. Some of the keenest of those observers, Israel knows, are enemies far more dangerous than Hamas. On Israel's northern border, Iran-armed Hezbollah sits on a stockpile of rockets and missiles buried in South Lebanon's towns and villages that dwarfs Hamas' arsenal by an order of magnitude, a strategic threat bolstered by never-ending supplies of even deadlier missiles from Tehran. And they're also developing the ability in Gaza and in Lebanon to manufacture the missiles, rocket fuel, and that type of thing on site in these tunnels. There is a deep link between the Gaza operation and the Lebanese front, a link that has existed between the two theaters since at least the summer of 2006, when a Hamas cross-border attack on IDF soldiers escalated into an Israeli operation into southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis. 2 weeks later, with Israeli forces still operating in Gaza, Hezbollah launched its own deadly attack on an Israeli military patrol on the northern border. So understand, 2006, they're doing all this stuff down in Gaza, and then up north, Hezbollah starts attacking, and now Israel's got to do this, and it took them 36 days. Back in 2014, I forget how many days the operation lasted, 6 days, 2 weeks. They have done more damage in Gaza in a few days than they did in that entire operation back in 2014. Well, was that the Lebanon one, was 51 days?
2014 Gaza.
Okay, Gaza was 51 days, you're right. I stand corrected. And the damage that was done then was pretty severe. They've already done that. They've surpassed that by an order of magnitude. The second Lebanon war then was in 2006. I think that was a 36-day incursion into southern Lebanon. They did a lot of damage. Remember, I played you the Israeli Air Force head from a couple years ago at the Netanya conference or Nahariya conference, where he said, listen, if we have to go into Lebanon, it's going to be shock and awe like you've never seen before. You're seeing a glimpse of that now in Gaza as to what they're preparing for to do to Hezbollah. And there's been some incursions across the border. They've already killed one person who did that. Both sides have spent the last 15 years upgrading their capabilities, and that hard-won deterrence may be fading. Hamas miscalculated the Israeli response to its initial rocket fire, in part because it did not realize the Israeli response would be geared to ensuring Hezbollah doesn't make the same miscalculation. When 3 rockets were fired from Lebanon on Thursday, landing in the sea, Hezbollah rushed to assure Lebanese media that it had not fired them, yet the rockets, apparently fired by a Palestinian group, were a potent reminder of the threat. Some Israeli analysts suggested that no Palestinian faction in Lebanon would have launched those rockets without the approval of Hezbollah. And then there are articles, this is from Tansim News today. This is an interview with, I forget the guy's name. I thought I had a better quote. Essentially, he says, listen, Hezbollah has your back here in southern Lebanon. We're going to support you just because Iran supports us here. Iran supports everybody in Gaza. So that mask is off. It's clear that Iran is funding all of these operations. Here's a little graphic from on the right, they're taking out some of the homes of the terrorists. And on the left, they're the ones that they know they've gotten so far in the Hamas leadership. There's also these are young men marching through a Jordanian checkpoint because they want to come join the fight. This is all kind of a big deal. What the tweet says is the human advance in Jordan is now bypassing the security men and heading towards the border with erased Palestine. And this is, I think there's sound on this one. So let me back it up and I'll start it again. And this is an Israeli security checkpoint near Ramallah. So there are attacks that are taking place at these checkpoints around Israel. Here is a article about the conflict between Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews in these cities. They've destroyed synagogues. Nadiv Shagrai in today's Israel Hayom says this. I think this was very profound that he said this. I hope you realize I read a lot of, I use translators to do this because I don't read Hebrew, but I thought this was a very profound article. You can find the English version of it, by the way. So this is what it looked like in 1929, he asks. I always tried to imagine and had a hard time with it. I didn't understand how one moment the Hebron Arabs turned over the Jews of Hebron. In the same yard, they cooked and joked and mourned together and murdering their Jewish neighbors. Now you no longer have to wonder what happened in 1929. This is very profound. I had actually pulled together some slides on 1929 because it reminded me a bit of that time. There's protests in Europe, Jordan, although there's some. This is the main government building in Prague, Czechoslovakia, flying the Israeli flag. Okay, so there's support for Israel. This is a protest in Paris. This is a protest in London. But this is 1929. This is a synagogue in Hebron, the second most important holy site to Jews. The cave of Machpelah, where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah are buried. It's it's if you've never been there, try to go there. It's this Herodian structure. It looks a lot like the structure at the Temple Mount, but it stood through earthquakes and all this other stuff. It's an incredible building, and nobody's ever knocked it down. That's the interesting thing. It exists here today, and there are some Orthodox Jews that make a spiritual connection because of the pattern of Jewish prophecy, is that at the time of the burial of Isaac, Jacob, I believe, I'd have to look back and look, Jacob and Esau came together. There was a reconciliation that took place. And so they look at it from a spiritual term and say, someday there will be a reconciliation. And I think that's clearly laid out in the prophetic scriptures. There is a great thing coming, but there's a lot of trouble in between. But what happened in Hebron in 1929, the Mufti of Jerusalem, the one who later collaborated with a government in Germany to kill Jews, some good evidence that he was the uncle of a guy named Yasser Arafat, and also had a relationship with the uncle of another guy named Saddam Hussein. And they wanted to kill the Jews. And so he started a rumor that guess what the rumor he used in 1929. So what's that, 82 years ago? 92? 92. Oh, I lost a decade somewhere. Oh, well. Don't give it back to me because then I'll have 10 more years. But anyway, so what do you think? How did they instigate this attack in Hebron on the synagogue? By the way, there's some, because of the slaughter, it was either 67 or 69 Jews were killed. They were killed by their neighbors. It would be like the people across the where you have them over for the neighborhood barbecue, and then they're incited to kill you. What incited them in 1929? Is it any way related to what the incitement was this year, this week? The pictures of the mosque burning and the Jews apparently celebrating it, they're coming to destroy Al-Aqsa and take over Al-Aqsa. They're coming back to take over the Temple Mount. The same thing that worked in 1929 is still working into the modern day and age that we have. I want you to understand that it's connected, and this does play into prophecy and that type of thing. Here's what, look at what Ayatollah, the Imam Khomeini, put up. An open wound on the body of the Islamic nation. And look what he uses. A menorah. So, and this is Iron Dome shooting down things. So listen, Naftali Bennett was going to form a government with the Lapid, who's, they say he's center-left. I think he's a leftist. He's kind of a lightweight. And they were going to get some help from one of the Arab parties, the Ram party, with a guy named Abbas. Not Mahmoud Abbas, but another guy named Abbas. And they were going to form a coalition, form a government, and Naftali Bennett was going to be the first prime minister. But when all this stuff started to unwind this week, I think, Naftali Bennett's done enough to be criticized pretty heavily. He used to be defense minister for a while. I think he may have learned a big lesson. And he said, I'm not going to form a government with Lapid. Now he's kind of backing off a little bit, saying, well, Lapid still has the mandate, but so they may be elections, but Naftali Bennett may throw in with Netanyahu. If you think all this other stuff is a mess, try to unwind Israeli politics. But he was interviewed on CNN the other night, and I thought, I'm only going to play a couple minutes of this, but listen to the questions. Look at the face of the CNN anchor asking these questions and the way she asked them. This is just from a night or two ago. Well, just the other evening.
You have expressed support for a forceful response from the Israeli government to what you call Gaza terrorists and, quote, Arab mobs. You called on the government to, quote, not end the current round of fighting in Gaza before Hamas pays a heavy price. What is that heavy price, sir? What is Israel's plan?
Well, listen, I'm not in favor of smacking people, but...
I'm shooting rockets at my own family and families across Israel unprovoked. You know, I spent the night in a shelter with my wife and 4 children in Ra'anana. There were sirens. There was a Holocaust survivor, 85 years old, who was murdered by a rocket that was shot from Gaza. She was on her wheelchair. This is what we're talking about. So any action that our government takes to stop all of this, I will back, even though I'm in opposition.
They were provoked, Hamas says, Sheikh Jarrah, and the action by Israeli security forces at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Last hour, I spoke to the Gaza director at UNRWA. Have a listen to what he told me.
I just heard this afternoon that the sister of my communications officer was killed in an airstrike. So this hits home very closely. I was informed this morning by one of our area staff, as we call them, our Palestinian colleagues, that a young girl going to an UNRWA school was hit by shrapnel and now has shrapnel stuck in her chest. And then, was it yesterday or the day before, 4 children were killed as a result of this violence.
I heard what you said. It must be incredibly frightening for your own family. Hold on, sir. It must be incredibly frightening for your own family. And there have been deaths on the Israeli side. That is important to report. There are over 50 people and counting who have been reportedly killed in Gaza, including 10 kids. 220 have been injured, including 41 children. I have to ask, why are innocent civilians being targeted there?
Because Hamas is killing them by hiding behind them, turning schools into terror centers, into putting kids and families around rockets. That's the cynical way of Hamas. All of this is unprovoked. If you have a grievance, you talk. You don't shoot rockets. And I'll tell you more. An Arab father, 54 years old, and his daughter, Nadine, 16 years old, was murdered by a Hamas rocket shot from Gaza into the city of Militias here in Israel. So when I say it's indiscriminate murder, I mean that. We handed the Palestinians Gaza. All of Gaza, take it, it's yours. And they created a state. There is a Palestinian state. They could have turned it into paradise. They decided to turn it into a terror state.
Sir, the UN has called on Israel to, quote, respect international humanitarian law, which stipulates airstrikes should only be directed at military objectives. How can any strikes on Gaza, which is such a densely populated area, be targeted at military sites only? It doesn't suggest that Israel is respecting international law, or that perhaps, will you admit that these airstrikes have been indiscriminate?
Absolutely not. Perhaps you suggest that we just lay back, let them shoot rockets at us, not shoot back because they're hiding the rockets behind women and children. Would you do that, Becky? If your family was under fire, would you suggest that your government not defend you because they're hiding the guns and rockets behind civilians?
Israel does hold all the cards in Jerusalem, Naftali Bennett, yet the city has never been more divided. Where does this end, sir?
Actually, the city has been way more divided. When it was under Arab rule, Jews were forbidden to go to the Wailing Wall. While it's under Israeli rule, and it'll continue to be under Israeli rule, any Muslim, any Christian, any Jew can enjoy the freedom of religion. So actually, it's been way more divided. Now it's united.
Let's get to the
yes,
question. Where
there
does
are
this end?
tensions.
Where does this end, is the question.
Oh, it ends very simply. The moment they decide that they don't want to annihilate us, this all ends. That's all. You know, not many of your viewers understand the reality that we're surrounded by folks who explicitly say they want to kill all the Jews. It's a very strange feeling. So, you know, when I go to work, I've got 4 kids, my wife, they want to kill us. We don't.
Can you believe that? I mean, you know, look, I think she's drunk. No, she's not. She is brainwashed. Listen, this is CNN. This is CNN. So listen, if you give me like 10 more minutes, I know I didn't promise this one would be quick. Other than quick is relative to 5 hours. So I guess it's still quick. This is Dor Gold writing at the JCPA today. I know this is this article about Mansour Abbas, the Abraham effect. So what this article at the JCPA, Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, says is, listen, you know, this is April 21st, this article was written, I think. Yeah. April 21st. And they're saying, look at what the Abraham effect, the Abraham Accords are doing. We have peace in Jerusalem. We have an Arab party wants to be part of the government and that type of thing. Well, what do you think happened? Do you think the Iranian people read this article at JCPA and said, you know, we gotta get a handle on this thing. We got to stoke some trouble. And so here's this is the Washington Post and New York Times this morning. Washington Post front page, Trump's Middle East deals fade amid war. And then, of course, the New York Times, they got to put their spin on it. Violence shakes Trump's boast of laying foundation for peace in region. Now, look, I've got problems with the Abraham Accords, but I just want you to understand is, do you understand what? It's like we're 4 or 5 months into this thing now with whoever's the third Obama administration. This is what's coming. Dor Gold has a great article today at the JCPA. I'm not going to read you all. You can go to the New York Times and read that monstrosity of an article if you want. Peter Beinart also on the editorial page the other day it's disproportionate. It's so terrible what Israel does. I can't believe we do this. It just stokes anger in the Muslim world. So, no, I'm not going to be balanced. If being balanced is the silliness that I saw someone saying, well, we need equity in the Middle East between Israel and Gaza. They should give Gaza an Iron Dome. I saw that this week. Dor Gold says this, the eruption of violence that we're seeing occurred during the month of Ramadan among the Muslims. While most Muslims find Ramadan to be a joyous time for a small but very dangerous minority, it's time to initiate what they call jihad. Whenever I see violence erupting, one of my questions is it something spontaneous? Did the population suddenly decide to go out for its own crusade, or was this something that was pre-planned? Was it something that was incited for political purposes? The evidence that the disturbance in Jerusalem were incited and planned is overwhelming. It was not spontaneous. One of the most disturbing aspects of what went on in Jerusalem is the evidence that the Palestinian organizations Hamas and Islamic Jihad were repositioning the implements they used for attacks on the Israelis on the Temple Mount. Those rocks, oh yeah, we were just doing that for defense against the soldiers. What if the Israeli police never showed up? What were they going to do with those rocks? Throw them over the wall onto the heads of the people down on the other side. But they're just rocks. Okay. You get over there, give me some rocks, and I'll drop them on your head from 80 feet. I wouldn't do it to the CNN anchor because it seems like she's already had some kind of brain trauma. I can't be very kind to that. So here is, so sue me. Hopefully it'll be a long case. Outbreak behind the outbreak of Palestinian violence. The Abraham Accords was the biggest source of defeat for Hamas and Iran. All of a sudden you have Israelis coming to Gulf states and speaking about their joint interests, which would include dealing with the problem of Iran. That was something which Iran wants to see rolled back and defeated. I believe they set as a goal themselves to break the Abraham Accords. Now listen, I am no fan of Tony Blair. He is a globalist, but I would highly recommend that you get the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. You can download it, the February 2021 report. I just found it this morning. I read it. It's actually pretty good. The View from Tehran, Iran's Militia Doctrine. It's a very good analysis of how Iran operates. And it talks about how Iran has these militias that they've funded all the way from Tehran to the Mediterranean. This is how they want to take things over. And then they also have a thing, the Defenders of the Shrines, and there's all these shrines throughout the Middle East that are very important. Here is a Twitter user, ELINT News, who took some of the information, I don't know, from this report, but it shows where all these militias are located that Iran is funding. I mentioned earlier that in the Second Lebanon War, 33 days, there were 4,000 rockets shot from Lebanon into Israel. There have been 3,000 in just a few days in Gaza. And this is what one of these, this is in that report, this is the Guardians of, this is, I'm trying to remember what they call this. And I forgot to put it in my notes. But this is from an Iranian Hezbollah source. This is how they view their function in the world. Militias without borders or something like that is what they call it. See how that, look at that. They have them all over the world. Colombia, Ecuador, I'm sure none of them are coming in this. What's the driving age in Central America? Is it like 4 that these kids can drive themselves to the border, these 4-year-olds? I'm being facetious. And they look at the command structure of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. We know this. Here's a quick, I shouldn't use the word quick anymore. I'm just going to play a minute or two. This is a Center for Security Policy did a webinar. David Wormser and Caroline Glick were 2 of the featured participants. David Wormser was interviewed on Secure Freedom Radio the other day. You should go listen to that interview. And then here's just a minute or 2 of Caroline talking about her view of what's going on in Israel.
Could you give us your perspective of what's going on, the situation on the ground?
Thanks so much again, Fred, and to all of our viewers who are tuning in for, I think, what is going to be a very important hour. And it's important because the war that's unfolding right now between Israel and Hamas, and really between Israel and its Arab citizens who are waging an insurrection against the country, is really a shift in what's been our reality in Israel for many years. And first of all, what we see is a vast upgrade in Hamas's military capabilities, its technological capabilities over what they were in 2014, the last time they opened a war against Israel. And I think it was in 2018, Ismail Sarsour, the head of their armed forces or their terror forces, said that today we have the capacity to launch in 5 minutes the entire number of missiles that we launched against Israel in 2014. And I think, that they've proven that. They have already in the space of just a few days launched about 2,000 rockets against Israel. They're capable of reaching about 80% of Israeli territory. They've sent millions of Israelis to bomb shelters. They've killed 7 Israelis as a result of their attacks. They were able to get through the fortifications of bomb shelters and killed a 6-year-old boy who's being held by his mother. She was critically wounded. So this is a different order of this is a different dimension. This is an order of magnitude than we've seen in the past. So Hamas definitely has that going. We'll get in a second what Israel has also done, because our abilities are formidable, and they were proven, I think, in a really extraordinary way last night. But the other aspect of this war that's so earth-shattering for Israelis is the lead role, really the dominant role that Israel's Arab citizens are playing in the violence. There's no word other than pogrom to really characterize the kind of violence that Arab Israelis have been undertaking against their Jewish neighbors in mixed Arab-Jewish cities throughout the country, whether it's in central Israel, in the cities of Ramleh and Lod, in northern Israel, in the cities of Haifa and Akko, in southern Israel, in the Negev, and in the city of Beersheba, in Jerusalem, of course. Arabs have simply been trying to lynch. They've been burning, lynched Jews, burning Jewish property, synagogues going up in flames, something that people haven't seen except for, in footage from pogroms in Germany in the Nazi period and in Eastern Europe. And this is happening in central Israel. Cars are being burned, torched by the dozens, as if we were in suburbs of Paris. And all of these things are happening now to police stations, and they haven't really happened in the past. We had a burst of.
Well, you can get the whole thing at the Center for Security Policy. Here's her article in Friday's Israel Hayom. I have this and just one other comment. I need to get rid of that word. For the past 75 years, she says, Israelis across the political spectrum have passively accepted Arab-Jew hatred. The left believe Jews earned the Arabs' hatred by defeating them in successive wars. To appease their hate, the left has pushed policies that restrain public expressions of Jewish pride, like the flag celebration, and holds Arabs to lower standards than they hold Jews, forgiving their anti-Semitism while condemning rare expressions of Jewish anti-Arab racism with all the passion and urgency they can muster. And there have been things that Israeli Jews have done wrong in this thing. The Israeli right has also taken the Arab Jew hatred for granted. Its members have argued that the way to diffuse or mitigate the hatred is to integrate Arab citizens into all walks of public life, never asking that they first accept the legitimacy of the state of Israel. The time has come to end this state of affairs. The Israeli-Arab pogroms of 2021, together with the Western left's adoption of narratives legitimizing Arab-Jew hatred, give Israel no option of continuing to pretend away or excuse this reality. Just as anti-Semitism was the central animating ideology of Nazism, so it is the central ideology of the Arab war against the Jewish state. To put an end to these pogroms now and to prevent them from recurring, Israel must end its tolerance for Arab-Jew hatred and must stop making apologies for Zionism and Jewish peoplehood. Israel must assert its national rights to all areas of this country without apology. It must do so consistently. Israel's future and the possibility that coexistence between Jews and Arabs will ever be restored depend on our willingness to forthrightly demand that Arab Israelis abandon their hatred of this country. Maybe she should be prime minister. So, where do you think we are on this Bible prophecy timeline? Getting closer? Zechariah chapter 12, verse 1. The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord. I saw somebody arguing this week, well, the state of Israel, you don't really need an Israel state to have all this stuff happen. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Really? I disagree with it. I thought it was very weak argument. The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens and layeth the foundations of the earth, and formeth the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege against both Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all people of the earth be gathered together against it. In that day, saith the Lord, I will smite every horse with astonishment, and his rider with madness. And I will open mine eyes upon the house of Judah, and will smite every horse of the people with blindness. And the governors of Judah shall say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be my strength in the Lord of hosts their God. In that day I will make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire among the wood, and like a torch of fire in a sheaf. And they shall devour the people round about. On the right hand and on the left, and Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, even in Jerusalem. The Lord shall also save the tents of Judah first, so that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah. We know there's a prophecy in Isaiah chapter 17 about the word of the Lord against Damascus. And I kind of think that what it says in Zechariah 9 is related to Isaiah 17, the destruction of Damascus. The burden of the word of the Lord, Zechariah chapter 9, verse 1, the burden of the word of the Lord in the land of Hadrach, and Damascus shall be the rest thereof. And when the eyes of man, as of all the tribes of Israel, shall be toward the Lord. Verse 4, behold, the Lord will cast her out, and he will smite her power in the sea, and she shall be devoured with fighters. It's talking about Tyrus and Zidon. And then this, Ashkelon shall see it in fear. Gaza also shall see it and be very sorrowful. And Ekron for her expectation shall be ashamed, and the king shall perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. You can read the whole chapter. I think I don't think we're there, but I think we're moving there. I said this last Sunday. Where do you think we are on this thing? The way things are moving. And each week I feel like I'm the super happy hour on TV, the really super duper happy hour, I'm sort of losing adjectives to show how I think things are escalating and coming together. So God is in control. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for opportunities to share the gospel, because that's what everybody, Jew, Arab, Gentile, everybody needs desperately. So let's pray. Father, thank you so much. Pray that you will give us wisdom and understanding of the times in which we live. Pray will you use that information to share the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ with those around us. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.